Okay.
That's for legal reasons.
Is it going to be used for blackmail material in the future?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to use
Well, I'll keep
everything
that in mind.
against you too. Okay, so we'll just jump right in.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about where you're a manager and how long you've been a manager.
Okay. Right now, I'm the market president for the Cushing branch of Blue Sky Bank in Cushing, Oklahoma. I've been here about a year. I've been a manager for about 20 years.
Wow. And how many people have you managed and how many do you currently manage?
So, do you just mean like what's the most I've ever managed, or
Um,
just over the course of my career?
yeah, I think over the course of your career, and then how many do you currently oversee?
Okay, probably. So before I came to the bank, my family had a small manufacturing company. We typically would have about 15 employees. So, and that's about how many I manage right now. Over the course of those years, probably 100 different staff members. I mean, just roughly over that time period. But I've always been in organizations about that size.
How would your direct reports describe your management style?
Uh, that's always tough, like how you think other people perceive you.
Mhm.
I think as a manager, I'm fairly laid back. I try to be very open just with what's going on. And I try to be direct as well, both in a good way and a bad way. So I really like to have a relationship with the people that I work with because I just think in general, it makes it easier to have difficult conversations. And it's also much more rewarding when you have good things that you can share. So just try to develop those relationships. And then again, I think I'm fairly laid back and open.
How has your management style changed as you've gained more experience and even as you've switched industries? If that's easier to answer.
Okay. Uh, I think probably over time, those characteristics that I described, I think I've probably moved more that way when I was much younger and had less in experience. I don't think I was as comfortable being open. I probably wasn't as comfortable being laid back. I think as I've gotten more comfortable being a manager and more confident in my role, I think it allows me, I don't know, maybe to give a little bit more and be a little bit more open, just share what's going on. More willing to listen, I think, to what my reports have to tell me as well. Because you're just more secure and comfortable that if you're going to hear something negative, that you'll know how to deal with it and address it.
So, if you could give one piece of advice to yourself when you first entered management, what would it be?
Probably not to take things so seriously. Um, Very early on, I think over the smallest thing, whether it be an employee issue or just something business related, I think I probably blew things out of proportion a little bit. And over time, just learned to realize that there's very few things that in the long run end up being major issues. And so, when something comes up, just deal with it and work the problem. And also understanding that as a manager, that's a big part of why you're there. I used to get upset, when you'd have these problems arise and I'd get stressed out and be mad about it until I finally realized that, look, for an organization that runs smoothly and perfectly all the time, you don't really need a manager for that. I mean, it can pretty much run itself. As a manager, you're there to deal with when those issues do arise. And so if I'm upset about having to manage difficult situations, then I probably shouldn't be a manager. So I think just accepting that that's part of your role
Yeah,
changes your mindset. So I just didn't get so upset every time something didn't go well.
that's good. What do you consider your greatest strength as a manager?
Uh, I think probably being able to, as I said before, I think having a relationship and being able to connect with people as a manager is very important. I don't think you necessarily, because there's all different types of managers and people with different types of personalities have all been successful being a manager. But for me, I've just found being able to connect with the people that I work with and the people that work for me just makes me a more effective manager because you do have to have difficult situations. And so if you have that relationship, that credibility, um, I think it allows people to hear negative messages and do a better job accepting them. So I think just being able to connect with people and at the same time trying to maintain a task focus because I've worked for managers that were extremes one way or the other. So where they were very task focused and they maybe weren't as good at connecting with people. And those type of managers for me were very difficult to work for. But I've also worked for managers that I think were so laid back and so people oriented that they weren't able to ever focus on the things that we had to get done. And so I've been frustrated in both directions. And so I've tried to develop a mix of both. And I guess I can't really say whether it's a strength or not, but that's what I'm shooting for sure.
Okay. What are the main strengths you look for in a new employee? Do you find yourself seeking out employees that have similar strengths to you, or do you sometimes try to, hire in your perceived areas of weakness and kind of counteract, where you think you are pretty strong?
Well, I think the culture of an organization is extremely important. If you have a good culture, everyone's happier, everybody performs better. Whereas if you have an unhealthy culture, you can have really good employees that don't perform well because they're not happy in their jobs. And so for me, hiring an employee, I want to try to find someone that I think is going to be a good fit for our organization. So that's the first thing that's very important to me, because you can have a very qualified and skilled person, but if they're just not a good fit for what you're trying to do in the organization and for the other people that work in the organization, it may not work out no matter how skilled they are or what their qualifications are. So, and for us, I would say here in Cushing, we really look for people that we think are going to match a certain attitude. And by that, I just mean an attitude of coming in, being willing to work and be willing to do whatever is asked. As a small organization, it's important. Sometimes people will have to do things that are not necessarily part of their job description. And so for finding someone that is willing to do that and will be happy to do that and wants to back up their teammate, that's extremely important to us. So just having a good attitude there. Work ethic, that's something that is very difficult to evaluate in an interview process. But I tell people that work for me, it's like you can control your attitude and you can control your work ethic. There's other things that maybe you can't control, but you always have control over that. That doesn't mean that there might be days that you're not feeling like you can work as hard as you want to. There might be days where you're not feeling well or something happened at home. And so you come in and you're not in a good mood, but you always have the choice of how you present yourself. And so you have control over those two things. So I want people, they're going to do their best at the things they can control to do a good job with those. If someone's willing to give me that, whatever the skills are, anything else, I feel like I can teach that. And then finally, something that I like to, I describe as just being conscientious. So just having an employee that is paying attention to the details, that when they see something that doesn't look quite right, it may not be in their job description that they need to go that little extra mile to check something, but just having that type of attitude that it's like, I want to make sure that this is done correctly. And this doesn't make sense to me, so I'm going to ask somebody about it. Because I can't tell you how many times over the years when you've had employees that are willing to do that, they make all the difference in the world with respect to, the kind of quality of service that the customer receives. So just being conscientious, I think, is something that's extremely important.
What are the key metrics to measure good performance?
So that obviously is going to vary. The specifics of it are going to vary depending on what the job is. But generally, it's those things that I just talked about. Is the person, how do they approach their job each day? Do they come in with a good attitude? For us, we're in a very service heavy industry where most of our competitors offer the same products that we have. And so service is a way to differentiate ourselves. So an attitude, if you go into a bank and the teller that's helping you is grumpy or doesn't smile at you or isn't friendly, that's not a place you're probably going to want to do business for the long term. So attitude is important, obviously. When I'm walking around the bank, are they working? Do I see them standing around talking? A lot of people think managers walking around, they're not noticing those things, but a good manager is always noticing those things that are going on around them. And so, are they staying focused on their task? And I very much care about process. Results obviously matter, but process is the thing that you can control. There's going to be times that the market is just not good for whatever it is you're trying to sell or whatever it is you're trying to do. But you can control whether or not you're going out and calling on customers or making phone calls or whatever it is that you have to do as a part of your job. So if an employee is working the process of what their job is, typically I'm going to be pretty happy with that. And I very much believe that over time, the results will come. So if they're working the process correctly, the results will eventually come. So again, it's just the things they can control. How are they doing on those things?
What are the common ways you see people fail as managers?
So the biggest one that I think I see from managers is an unwillingness to deal with uncomfortable situations. And I think that's just human nature for not wanting to deal with it. But if you have an underperforming employee, it's easier to just ignore it than address it. Or if there's something, in the organization, the way that it's set up or the processes that, sometimes those can be painful, especially if you're having to go to someone that's above you in the organization and tell them, hey, I think the way that we're doing this is wrong. A lot of people don't like to have those conversations. And so I think a lot of managers, because they want to avoid the confrontation, they just kind of kick the can down the road. And I also think managers sometimes just have an unwillingness to admit that they're wrong, an unwillingness to ask questions, to admit that they don't know. They think because they're a manager, they have to know more than everybody else. And so I see managers do that all the time. And I've never had a problem with asking people questions. I don't like admitting I'm wrong. I'm like, but I have to work on that. But just asking questions, the people that do the job every day, the people that you're managing, the likelihood is they're going to know the job better than you. And so I've seen managers go in there when they see something they don't like and they start firing off on an employee without fully understanding exactly why what they saw happening was happening. And so I just think a willingness to ask questions, listen to what they have to say. And most of the time, I think you can end up with a good resolution.
If you could pass on any advice to future managers and leaders, what would it be?
Well, one thing is just when it comes to being a manager, just be yourself and find a style that works for you, because there are all types of managers and all types of ways to be successful as a manager. I would think the one common thread is, if you're naturally a laid back person, like I think I am for the most part, then, don't try to go against what your personality is. Just find a way to be successful within what your natural strengths and personality is. I would say, like, if there's an employee that you feel like is underperforming, look at yourself first before you go and get on them. If you go to a restaurant like Chick-fil-A, they're known for having very good service. And then you can go to some other fast food restaurants where the service is very poor. And I always, when I'm in those places, feel like when I go to a place like Chick-fil-A, I'm like, they've trained their employees really well. And when I go to a place where you get poor service, I feel like they haven't trained their employees very well. It's very possible that it's just an employee thing, but when you see that in organizations, I think organizations in general oftentimes do a very poor job of giving their staff the tools they need to be successful. Either they don't have the right tools or technology, they've overloaded them so they don't have enough time, they haven't trained them properly. And so as a manager, it's your responsibility to equip those people to be successful. So if you see an employee that's underperforming, ask yourself those questions. Have you given them the things that they need to be successful? Have you trained them properly? Have you given them what they need? Instead of just immediately going to them and criticizing them or reprimanding them for not doing well. And then I would just always just be genuine. Don't try to ever be anything that you're not. Don't try to pretend to know things that you don't know. I think just relationships in general, people respond to that. And so I think as a manager, I know for my man, I'd much rather have a manager that would come to me and ask me questions or is willing to admit that he doesn't know something, as opposed to a manager that is afraid of looking like they don't know something. And so therefore they try to pretend to know something they don't. So just be genuine. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be the smartest all the time. And I think people will respond to that and respect it.
All right. Well, thank you so much.